What's going on, guys? Welcome into today's show. We've got a great one packed full of some good topics. Lots going on right now. Mr. Breedwell is still out on vacation, so I hate to disappoint if you were here to listen and see him. That being said, I'll bring some fire for you guys. We got some updates on Congress's final decision on insider trading and can politicians trade stocks. You guys know we've talked about that for quite some time. We've got some updates on the campaign trail with Kamala Harris and some of the things that she has been doing. We've got some breaking insights as to what's going on with the election in Venezuela and some of the kind of scary comparisons to what we're seeing between there and here in the US. We've got updates on earnings season and what's been going on with big companies reporting who's winning, who's losing. We've also got Mr. Trump, who has recently been at the Bitcoin conference and some pretty big things that he promised and said. We'll break those down, as well as some commercial real estate news and the crisis that is starting to mount up there, as well as some single family real estate updates. Let's dig into today's episode of Money Moves. All right, guys, we got a great show for you today. I'm going to be a little bit lighter on my opinions when it comes to the stock market. That is Mr. Breedwell's lane and world. But we've got lots of things that I know he's going to fill us in on. He gets back in the studio with me next week. So let's just go ahead and jump in, being that the stock market had experienced its worst week of the year, and a major pullback in tech stock is really what was driving that. We're seeing that the earnings reports coming in are also playing a little bit of a role in this pullback. About a third of the way through second quarter earnings season, we're seeing that a large proportion of companies beating revenue expectations is the lowest since 20. A big one that we saw take a big tumble with their stock valuation was our darling NVIDIA. I saw that NVIDIA has now erased $1 trillion of market cap since its all-time high set on June 20th. In other words, they've erased $200 billion of market cap per week over the last 5 weeks, and the stock is now down 27% from its recent all-time high. That being said, my opinion is, 1, it was definitely due for a pullback. 2, they still are the king of this space, and there is still plenty of runway if you're playing the long-term game, knowing that they are driving the ship when it comes to the chip market. But the question many people are asking is, did we see the bubble just pop with their stock, or is this a pullback that is going to recover quickly? Time will tell. I think the most important news that I saw this last week that was very exciting and very long overdue was a bill that would completely ban Congress members and their families from trading stocks while in office, which was approved by the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, which is the first time such a bill has made it out of the committee. And this is the Ethics Act, which was introduced by Senator Jeff Merkley, Josh Hawley, John Ossoff, and Gary Peters, a bipartisan bill, which it's not often we see many of those getting pushed through our government anymore. And yet, I think what this does, while it is, a win for the general public to know that, the rules that everybody is having to abide by, outside of obviously the politicians that many of us could point fingers to, like the Feinsteins, like the Pelosi's, like the Newsoms, and honestly many others. There's really culprits on all sides of the aisle that are taking advantage of this, that these rules apply to everybody. It definitely deters and detracts from the trust and integrity, not only that people playing this wealth building game have in the system, in the exchanges, in the stock market process, but I think more importantly, it is a necessary check and balance around the integrity and the ethics and the fiduciary responsibility that politicians and public service men and women should be held to when it comes to the standards of operating in a way that allows us to have trust in those individuals. And when you see somebody making a modest salary as a public servant of $100,000 or $200,000, but they've got hundreds of millions of dollars in net worth and they're full-time politicians, that math, those things don't add up and connect. And so for me, more so, it's not about that I think they are hurting people by doing these things. They're really just enriching themselves, but they're doing it in a way that is totally eroding the fabric of trust, the expectations that we as citizens, as constituents, should be able to have and uphold when it comes to our politicians. And so the fact that they are moving this forward, I think, is a very positive thing to close that loophole and to create some accountability and ultimately just to reinstill some trust in an area, a very gray area, a very stigmatized area of politicians, which is their greed. And when you can take away some of the things that lead to people's greed and you don't tempt them, not saying it's going to fix everything, but it's one less thing that we have to worry about corrupting them even further. And you would have, probably some wild stories to think about around how these individuals gain access to this information, what they use this information for outside of just investing in stock trading to benefit themselves or their own personal and or party needs. Again, all sides of the aisle. And ultimately, I think when we are all looking to play the wealth building game, we want to know what the rules are so we can play the game to the best of our abilities. And when the rules for this group but apply here, but they don't apply over there for that group, right? It dilutes and muddies the water and the pool in which we're all swimming in. And so I was very happy to see this, and I thought that was some great updates from the stock market sector this last week. Now, as we head into the FOMC meeting tomorrow, as I record this is Tuesday, so Wednesday when you guys are hearing this or when this launches, we've got the FOMC meeting, which is a likely pause, but we do have our first rate cut pretty much baked into the market now in September. It's looking like we have at least one more, if not two more potential rate cuts coming as well this year. But we are headed into a season where we're going to see some, monetary easing with a lot of the data that has continued to trickle in over the course of the last few months, which ultimately is what the Fed wants to see, is a little bit more pain, is, some of the challenges that a lot of us have been feeling and seeing in the market. The Fed is now starting to see that data catch up, and ultimately they're going to look to make some decisions to try and, thread this needle as finely as they can and get a soft landing. But there's still some major challenges to be thinking about when it comes to, whether or not the Fed is going to be able to prevent a hard landing or any type of recession. If I head over to, let me see if I can find, I think it's on the Kobe Essie letter. What we've been seeing is there's a study and a graph that is called, come on, it's in here somewhere. I got to find it. It is called look, there we go, right here. So it is called the SAHM rule, SAHM rule, and it's an economic indicator suggesting a downturn once the unemployment rate increases 50 basis points above its previous 12-month low. In previous business cycles, every time this indicator crossed above the 50 basis point threshold, a recession followed. It now stands at 40 basis points, just 10 basis points away from signaling a recession in the U.S. The unemployment rate would need to rise to 4.2% in this week's jobs report to break that threshold. And you can see and look up a pretty good graph that shows based on the SOM rule data of previous recessions, this graph is pretty accurate. So we're kind of teetering on that edge. Now, I know Mr. Breedwell would say there's no possible way, and we just had a relatively strong GDP print, at least a decent GDP print. So going into a recession doesn't look like a likely thing. But that being said, I think those are, things that you want to keep an eye on, because depending on what investments you're making, whether it's in your business, whether that's with employees, whether that's, in certain assets or the stock market or whatever it is, taking this data and, at least putting it into your archives to determine whether or not, based on how things play out, you were right or you were wrong, is just going to, equip you for making more educated and data-driven decisions going forward. But what I can tell you is Americans are struggling to save money right now. The U.S. personal savings rate declined from 3.5% in May to 3.4% in June, which is the lowest since December of 2022. Now, by comparison, in May 2023, the savings rate was 5.3%. Excluding 2022, the savings rate sits at its lowest level since 2008's financial crisis. And this comes, guys, after U.S. households over $2.3 trillion of excess savings since 2021. Now, at the same time, the credit card debt reached $1.06 trillion in July, just $3 billion below the all-time record high. And so I know some of you are still sitting on cash and savings, waiting for, the opportunities that I believe and many believe are coming, in the next few years. I know a lot of big hedge funds, a lot of big sovereign funds, they're sitting on more cash than they've ever had before. And there's a reason why the smart money is cashing up, right? This COVID party that we've been living in for the last few years, and, the data and the economy has shown that things have been good and relatively strong, and they have been. And I still have felt like there's going to be some type of, domino that's going to fall, that's going to create some ripple effect and some damage, some distress in ways that are going to create great opportunistic buys. Whether that is in the stock market, and I'd let Ryan speak to that a lot more than I have. He still seems to think that there's going to be a pretty epic, setup and run going forward. Others maybe feel a little bit different. We've also seen that, in my opinion, the, trillions of dollars of commercial real estate backed mortgage debt that is coming due over the next few years is undeniable to say that it's not going to have an impact and a ripple effect in certain areas of our economy. And I don't think that many of the banks, and really many of these are small banks, and let me just pull up a little bit of data for you on that so you guys can understand what I'm talking about here specifically. But the commercial real estate crisis is definitely continuing to spread, and really the cancer within commercial real estate right now is office. Now, multifamily is a close second because of the, interest rates rising, rents plateauing, certain, markets having an oversupply and over delivery of multifamily. And so we're seeing a big pullback on that. We're seeing cap rates expand. So the values of a lot of these assets are much lower than not only the the mortgages that they have on them, but on top of that, the adjustable rate mortgages and the resets that many of these had when they bought them jumped up significantly higher with interest rates as they rose over the last 18 to 24 months, which has put the debt service in a negative yielding position right now that is pushing a lot of people into pre-foreclosure, giving the keys back. That distress is mounting, and it's mounting quickly. In U.S. office vacancy rates in San Francisco, that reached almost 26% in June, which is amongst the most among major metro in the U.S. This is also followed by Houston and Seattle, where office vacancy is at 23.8% and 23.2%. And if I were to go to the lowest vacancy rates in office, those markets are still a whopping 12, almost 13.5%, which is Miami, Boston, and Tampa. And we all know those are really strong markets from an overall perspective, and yet we're still seeing high vacancy rates in those markets, even though those are considered the lowest right now. Now, meanwhile, the nationwide office vacancy rate hit a record 20% in Q1 of 2024, above 2020 levels. So you guys can see here, in times of insane crisis, black swan event crisis, 2008, 20, they are well above that. And vacancy rates are expected to rise, according to Moody's, as high as 24+% by 2026. So there's definitely, and again, just because you're like, oh, well, I'm not interested in commercial real estate, or I'm not interested in office buildings, that's not going to impact me. Wait, hold on. Don't jump to conclusions too quickly, because there's jobs, there's construction, there's tax dollars, there's communities, right? When these things sit vacant and they have no use for them, or the readaptive use, which is what a lot of commercial real estate investors and developers are looking at with these buildings, because the economics in so many other areas like building, like development, right, like labor, like going through these municipalities are not incentivized or not economically feasible, right, then these things don't get done. They just sit there. And so a blank building, a vacant building just sitting there, it doesn't bode well for the community. It doesn't bode well for the state, and it doesn't bode well for the overall economy. So the real estate crisis is definitely a major problem in certain sectors. But again, this is ultimately where these are going to be some of the greatest generational wealth building opportunities that we will see in commercial real estate, because just because it's in, office only or in multifamily, those are going to have ripple effects into other asset classes and are going to create some great opportunities. Now, meanwhile, I want you guys to think about this. 70% of those commercial real estate loans that are in distress, those are held by small banks. So there's definitely going to be some turmoil and some challenges with small banks, with regional banks. But I'm still of the sentiment that the government isn't going to allow anything catastrophic to happen. Will they allow those banks to fail? Yes, to a certain extent. If it is not in their interest to save them, then they won't. If it is in their interest to save them, or they have to, then they will. And we obviously saw that with, SVB, and other banks, that, they had good things on their balance sheet and, good opportunities there, but they, saved some and they decided not to. And I think we'll see that in this same, season of crisis in banks going forward, with more of the bigger banks swallowing up some of the smaller banks. So nothing too insane there, but again, just good opportunities to be keeping an eye out for. We did see Donald Trump announce that he will create a U.S. government Bitcoin strategic reserve if elected president. This was a really big deal after speaking at the Bitcoin conference in Miami this last week, which ultimately he kind of talked about a plan to stockpile Bitcoin similar to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that we see today. And if this happens, this could be by far the biggest development in the crypto history. And as a result of that, prices on Bitcoin jumped, spiking on that announcement, which it was up more than 60% over the last 6 months. So Bitcoin's been having a nice little run. I'm not paying attention too much to it. I'm a long-term holder, as those would say. But I do see more and more attention, more and more discussions around Bitcoin being something that a lot of people are paying more attention to. Adoption is happening, and we're starting to see that reflect in a lot of the discussions. Obviously, this is a hot topic on the campaign trail, and this was the most widely sought after announcement at the Bitcoin conference. Donald Trump also said that Bitcoin will one day probably surpass the market cap of gold. So you can kind of see, right, the connection they're trying to make there in terms of store of value, creating a reserve, strategic reserve for this. So it's getting more attention, and to act like it's not, or that it's, a nothing burger, I think would be dismissive of potentially an opportunity. Now, am I going to go dump all my money into crypto? No. But am I going to continue to think about diversifying and, potentially creating a larger sliver of my holdings into that? Yeah, I am. I mean, shoot, look at what's been going on. If you've been following what's been going on with Venezuela, and what's been going on with China, and bank runs and people not being able to access their money in China. In Venezuela, there's some major revolts and protests going on right now after Venezuela's president Nicolas Maduro won in this election, which pretty much everybody said was a landslide for his opposition. It's interesting. If you go look at their quote unquote charts and data, the overnight spike of a pretty normal graph climbing up to a massive jump up, kind of like what we saw when there were overnight, ballots collected in certain key swing states in the 2020 election. These things are interesting. And so, again, when you think of people not trusting in their democracy, not trusting in their government, not trusting in the election process that is the checks and balances of their government, which ultimately Venezuela is a perfect case study for a socialist regime and how quickly you can destroy a thriving and abundant country. I mean, there was an interesting timeline that I saw that I found very interesting. I was digging into more about Venezuela, and one of their things here, let me find it. Here we go. So Venezuela in 1992 became the third richest country in the hemisphere. 1997, they became the second largest producers of the F-150. 2001, voted for socialist president because they wanted income equality. They did it all in the name of this equality. And you'll see some interesting similarities to a lot of the narratives and things that we're seeing right now, because I'm just going to call it the way I see it. While I don't like Kamala Harris and who she is and how she represents herself, I just don't like her policies, because I believe a lot of her policies are flat out socialist. And I care about, America, knowing that there is no model of socialism that has worked and been successful. And in 2004, we saw Venezuela created private healthcare is completely socialized now. In 2007, all higher education becomes free. In 2009, socialists ban private ownership of guns. 2012, Bernie Sanders praises their quote-unquote American dream. 2014, oppositional leaders start becoming imprisoned. 2016, food and healthcare shortages become widespread. 2017, the Constitution and elections are suspended. Crazy. 2019, unarmed citizens are being massacred by their own government in many different stages. It took only one generation of progressive leadership to plunge the country into civil war. And if you look at what is going on right now, it is wild. Now, today, Nicolas Maduro, basically the authoritarian, the dictator, says he will release full voting records from Venezuela's election. However, this comes after the results of an election many have accused him of fraud, and he says there will be a significant delay due to quote-unquote attacks on the electrical grid and them trying to release that information. Now, I just think it's important to study this story and how it's unfolding right now, because for the first time in 25 years, it looked like as if democracy was going to be restored in Venezuela, that they had an oppositional leader who, by the way, there's a video online and a story online today of him being kidnapped out of his own home. This is the guy who supposedly won, and there is military coming in and essentially kidnapping this dude out of his house. So you want to talk about a banana republic. You want to talk about using lawfare to go against your political opponents. I'm not saying there's any, similarities here to anything we've been seeing or hearing. God forbid, that would be crazy, right? But to give you an idea, over the last 25 years, going from one of the most rich and abundant countries in the world to now suffering the world's worst economic collapse ever, you point to leadership. The GDP of Venezuela has contracted by over 7, almost 3 times as bad as the Great Depression. The currency became nearly worthless as inflation soared over 1,000,000% in 2018. Yes, you read that right. 1,000,000% inflation. Around 8 million Venezuelans, more than 25% of the population, have left the country since 2015, one of the largest displacement crises in the world. The once modern infrastructure has crumbled. The healthcare system has virtually collapsed. And this list goes on and on and on. And so I just think it's important right now, especially for all of us, to be paying attention to history, paying attention to what's going on around the world, because we have an election that can significantly play into your freedoms, your financial future, and your family and your communities going forward. And with Kamala Harris replacing Joe Biden this last week, she raised over $200 million in hours, which is the highest campaign raise ever in American political history, which is wild. And I just thought it, and I guess found it very ironic, that Trump got convicted of writing a check with quote unquote non-campaign funds as a political finance felony. That was one of his felonies. The Biden campaign just turned over all of their donations to another candidate who didn't have 1 cent donated to her and wasn't actually the choice of her constituents. Of course, there's not going to be, any prosecutions on that. But what I see unfolding right now is, I guess, just a little concerning. I mean, it's becoming one of the most racially and gender charged elections that I've ever seen. I mean, personally, if you were to, say that as a white man, I'm voting for Donald Trump because he's white, that white person would be called a racist. They'd be called a sexist, right? And rightfully so. You shouldn't be bringing those things up. You just want to say, I'm voting for this person because I believe in their policy, or I believe in how they carry themselves, or I believe they have America first, or I believe they care about this issue more than the other person does, which means something to me. But that same rule should apply anybody else saying, hey, I'm voting for this person because they're a black woman, right? And so this narrative, it's very one-sided, and I find it, quite odd that, this is kind of becoming the front and center discussion that we're seeing in so many of these, talk tracks right now. I mean, the 2024 presidential election has quickly become one of the most racist elections in American history. If, you think about, she's not running on merit anymore. She's running on a platform that has to do with her skin color. Now she's recruiting white dudes for Harris and white women for Harris to segregate voters. I mean, that's unheard of, right? Like, that is not inclusive and progressive. That's really more divisive and regressive. I mean, I've even seen videos of people going to, a Trump rally with a Harris Biden shirt on, and people going, "Hey man, come on in. We'll convert you. Come on over." And everybody's super kind and nice. And somebody wearing a Trump shirt to a Harris Biden rally, and it is wild how aggressive, how accosted these people get, how dangerous it is in many scenarios and situations. And so, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like while I'm voting with my pocketbook in many scenarios, now more than ever, I'm voting for my values, and my values are based on the party that says they are inclusive and kind is the one that ultimately is the most hypocritical and not those things. And, democracy means not winning all the time. Democracy means playing by the rules and letting the process work the way it's supposed to work. Therefore, you don't get to remake, the Supreme Court rules because they ruled against you, which I'm sure many of you saw this week. Joe Biden's proposal to restructure the Supreme Court. It doesn't mean that you get to assassinate your competition to stop him from winning, or to start pulling lawfare to prevent him from campaigning or to being on the ticket. You don't get to appoint a presidential candidate without the voters voting for her. I mean, she got absolutely destroyed 3.5 years ago by Tulsi Gabbard and didn't have one vote because they knew they couldn't get her on the, Democratic ticket. And now all of a sudden, after 3.5 years of them telling us that Joe Biden was totally fine and that he was normal and all of these things are, just lies from the right, she was, in the end of the day, the closest to it and the biggest liar of it. And now she ultimately is asking us to trust her. And it is just mind-boggling. So just some wild stuff going on with politics right now. But to point out what's going on in Venezuela, I think is really important because it ties into why I believe more and more people, and when we see these types of case studies on a global stage and people see this stuff playing out in another country, and then they start seeing certain smells and tastes of it in their own country, it leads people to now start looking at things like Bitcoin and decentralization of currency in a little bit of a different light. Now, do I think the US dollar is going anywhere? No. And do I think that America is still the best country and that we'll find a way to work this out? Absolutely. No matter what the result is, right? There's still so much opportunity out there. But at the end of the day, we've seen with certain case studies, you can go from the top and you can erode down to the bottom very quickly when you vote for people and politicians and policy that is socialist like this, that can completely unravel an economy, that can completely unravel a country, and can completely damage so many amazing things that have taken generations and centuries to build. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm so grateful and proud to be an American and to have the opportunities that I have to own a business, to invest, to build wealth, to create an impact for myself and my family, for my employees, for people that are friends, that are listeners, that are out doing the same thing. And I don't want to see any of that go away. So just some quick little thoughts there as we wrap up today's discussion. We'll be tracking a lot of this stuff closely to just keep an eye on things as they unfold. And really, most importantly, just to spotlight corruption, to spotlight BS, to bring more discussion to things that probably deserve more discussion. And I'm saying this on all sides. I always try and be as fair and unbiased as I possibly can to give discernment to real topics that there's a lot of things on the right that I don't agree with their stance and how they take things. And ultimately, they don't bring others from the left over. And the same goes on the left and the opportunity they have for bringing people over on the right. And when you think about how modest and middle most of us are and what, common goals and things we all share for ourselves, for our families, for our health, for our safety, there's a lot of BS that ends up clouding the judgment of so many people when we're all just so alike and we are so, focused on the things that we shouldn't be. So, single family, as we close out, we saw a record high in cancellations, so things starting to slow down there a little bit. The highest share of any June on record since 2017, according to a recent Redfin report, shows that there were record number of home cancellations. I don't know if that's more and more people going, hey, I think there's a rate cut coming around the corner and I think I'm going to hold out. That being said, that's also what pretty much everybody else is thinking. And so the demand, the competition is going to be fierce. So be aware of that if that is your thought track. Also, we have seen inventory jump up a little bit more, which I think is a healthy thing. Meanwhile, the median home sale price in June was up 4% year over year, climbing to a record $442,000. Many big cities and metros having the highest number of $1 million base entry points than any time ever in history. Now, of course, those are going to be your big metros and cities, the San Franciscos, the San Jose's, the LA's, the New York cities, certain markets in Florida. But we are still seeing an affordability issue in a very big way, and that'll be something that we continue to keep an eye on as well. So appreciate you guys tuning in today. As always, be sure to check out millionaireMindcast.com for the great stuff that we got in the store for you guys. A lot of people have been downloading the net worth tracker as well as the personal financial statement. Those are two great tracking tools for your net worth, for your assets, your liabilities, and for all of your investment accounts to keep those really organized. This is a great way that I'm able to, kind of have that snapshot of everything in once whenever I'm trying to go qualify for a bank loan, or I'm trying to get insurance, or I've got somebody that's asking for those things. It's all in one spot in that personal financial statement with your real estate, your stocks, your funds, mutual funds, bonds, life insurance, you name it. So if you guys haven't checked that out, check out millionaireMindcast.com in the store. I think you guys will get some great value out of that. And all I ask is that if you guys enjoy the show, please take 60 seconds, leave a review. I'm going to continue trying to put up a lot more actionable content on the social media channels for you guys. To join if you're a commercial real estate investor, to check out the free Facebook group if you want to be in those types of conversations, because this is my opinion. Take it for what it's worth, but I think this will be one of the greatest commercial real estate wealth building opportunities we will ever see. Obviously, a big part of this was seeded by the, post-COVID era and the challenges and the shifts that came because of that, in addition to the interest rate hikes, in addition to the crazy buying sprees that we saw, and the amount of money flying into a lot of deals and markets that ultimately probably shouldn't have gone into those. And that's going to create massive opportunity. So if you want to be in the right conversations, you want to be a part of the right masterminds, you want to be around the right people, or just, being in those types of environments, and that's a goal for you to buy a commercial real estate asset, or to invest in commercial real estate, then join the free Facebook group, our Wise Investor Network. This is going to be a network we build out of wise investors all across the country that want to be participating in these conversations. You can find that on Facebook, or if you're an active real estate investor and you're somebody that really wants to be a part of a group, a mastermind that is consistently doing these things every single week, and you want to be around real action takers, people that are doing it, buying properties, sharing strategies, talking about how they're doing these deals, lead generation, structuring the financing, then go to wiseinvestorcollective.com, put in your application. We're going to be opening that up here in Q4 as well, and we're starting to take applications for the next round there. That being said, appreciate you guys tuning in. Keep investing in yourself and your wealth on your march to $1 million and beyond. We will see you guys in next week's episode. Cheers.